Hello friends and welcome to my new video. Today I'll be talking about a filmmaker who all I have to do is mention one film and he will be immediately recognized by cinema lovers not only all across India but all over the world. His identity with one film is so strong that all it takes is that film to know him. And yet, in my episode today, I want to try and establish the fact that Ramesh Sippy is a lot more than just Sholay. Yes, I'll be talking about the famous director Ramesh Sippy today, son of eminent producer G.P. Sippy. Ramesh Sippy has a lot more to his credentials than just the biggest film ever made in India, Sholay. Ramesh Sippy studied in Bombay. He grew up in Bombay, studying in St. Xavier's School, and then went off to the London School of Economics in UK to study. But he didn't like it there because he missed the environment of films which he had grown up in, thanks to his father G.P. Sippy being a famous producer who produced movies like Mere Sanam and Johar Mahmood in Goa, Bandhan, etc. So Ramesh Sippy came back from LSE and joined a psychology course in Bombay University, to continue his education. But he eventually realized that he couldn't be kept away from films. The lure of films was too much for him to stay away from. And he joined his father's production unit. And one of his earliest jobs, as he mentions, was in H.S. Ravel's Mere Mehboob, where he was a production assistant, and his job was to carry slippers for the heroine of the film Sadhna. So that's how Ramesh Sippy started his journey in films, carrying slippers for Sadhna. And it was just that he had such a keen interest in cinema and such a strong desire to make films that he was willing to learn the ropes the hard way and not take advantage of the fact that he was a producer's son. Ramesh Sippy assisted his father and the directors who were working with his father quite closely in films like Johar Mahmood in Bombay and Bandhan, which had Rajesh Khanna in it. And it was during that period of 1969 that he sat along with another young writer, Gulzar, to work on a script which was about a widower falling in love with a young widow, a widower with a child falling in love with a young widow who also had a child. It was quite a unique story, quite a fresh story, something like which had never been seen on Hindi screen before. And he decided to cast Shammi Kapoor, who was at that point in time well past his prime as a leading man, but perhaps suited the role of this elderly widower, and Hema Malini as the young widow. And it was, the movie turned out to be a hit. Everyone not only liked the freshness of the subject, but even the way the sensitive subject was quite handled by the director. Shammi Kapoor, Hema Malini, and of course there were special appearance stars like Simi and the superstar Rajesh Khanna. And overall, Andaz turned out to be the first film directed by Ramesh Sippy, and it did well at the box office, and it launched Ramesh Sippy as a director of great promise and someone whose films were to be looked forward to. That was the start of Ramesh Sippy as a filmmaker. Andaz, starring Shammi Kapoor, Hema Malini, Rajesh Khanna, and Simi. A great movie. Now, while working on Andaz, in fact, Hema Malini had recalled this in an interview, that she kept on seeing Ramesh Sippy with two young writers who were always sitting and huddling together and discussing scripts and ideas. And in fact, these two had also helped with the writing of Andaz. Although the story was Gulzar's, they had helped with the writing of Andaz. And these two were none other than Salim Khan and Javed Akhtar, who would go on to become the famous scriptwriters Salim Javed. Salim Javed were both young and ambitious and raring to go. They had a lot of ideas in their heads, and they had a lot of drive in them to take those ideas forward. And it was Salim Javed who suggested a script to Ramesh Sippy for his next film. And it so happened that Ramesh Sippy liked the idea. It was basically a rehashing and a regendering of Ram or Shyam, the Dilip Kumar double role. And it turned out to be Sita or Gita. And Ramesh Sippy was quite enthused by the script, and he wanted to take Mumtaz in the lead role of Sita and Gita. However, for whatever reasons, Mumtaz couldn't do the film, and he offered it to his heroine from the earlier movie, Hema Malini, and she grabbed the opportunity, and in 1972 released Sita or Gita, starring Hema Malini in the double role of the two sisters, and Sanjeev Kumar and Dharmendra as her two love interests. And Sita or Gita turned out to be a smash hit. Be it the unique, pacey, fun story, the superb direction by Ramesh Sippy, fine performances by Hema Malini, Sanjeev Kumar, Dharmendra, some great music by R.D. Burman, and Sita or Gita really catapulted Ramesh Sippy into the big league. He was now a director who was much spoken about and talked about, and people were now beginning to take serious note of Ramesh Sippy as a filmmaker. Sita or Gita was his first mega bumper hit. Now, while Sita or Gita was made, Salim Javed were writing other scripts as well for other people. And one particular script which Salim Javed had written, and they had sold to a producer called Baldev Pushkarna for 20,000 rupees. And Baldev Pushkarna was very keen that director Manmohan Desai make this film. And he showed the script to Manmohan Desai, and Manmohan Desai really wasn't enthused by it. He instead asked Salim Javed to work on Chacha Bhatija, which was more exciting and fun and more the kind of cinema that he liked doing. So when Ramesh Sippy wanted to start his next movie, he sat with Salim Javed, and Salim Javed said that, look, we have a complete bound script called Majpur, which you can take. It's ready to shoot. You just have to cast and shoot. Or there is this 4-line idea which we had sold to Baldev Pushkarna, the producer, and he refused to make the film. But we quite like it, and if you are interested in it. And Ramesh Sippy decided to hear, he was very excited by the script of Majpur, and he had the script with him. But he said that, let me listen to the other script as well. It was about an army officer, a colonel or a major in the army who had retired, and he was on the lookout for a couple of court-martialed officers whom he had court-martialed years ago, and he was looking to find them, to seek some sort of a personal vengeance. That was the story. Somehow, Ramesh Sippy liked that idea, and he asked Salim Javed to work on it. And work on it they did. And there were changes made, like the army backdrop was changed to a police backdrop, and the colonel became a police officer, and the two court-martialed officers became two petty thieves. And eventually it turned out to be a story familiar to most people of two petty thieves being hired by an ex-police officer to avenge the death of his family. That was as simply what the film was about. It was launched in 1973 and released in 1975, and it not only would become Ramesh Sippy's biggest film ever, it would become India's biggest film, and it would become the film that would be associated to Ramesh Sippy, that would stick by Ramesh Sippy all his life, all his career. The one and only Sholay. Sholay, that's how Sholay started, as a 4-line story idea rejected by people like Manmohan Desai, but eventually recognized as a workable idea by Ramesh Sippy, who made Sholay. And so much can be said about Sholay and its making that I'll probably have a separate full episode just on this movie, just on Ramesh Sippy's hard work and passion and labor of love, as a separate episode altogether. But it would be fitting to say that Sholay was a special baby for Ramesh Sippy, and the kind of passion and the kind of hard work and enthusiasm not only he but the entire unit put up for the film actually showed in the end result. And it still stands the test of time over 46 years since its release, and I'm sure will go on as being the most memorable Hindi cinema ever to have been made. Sholay was Ramesh Sippy's greatest triumph and the greatest high in his career as a filmmaker. The problems come with a success as magnum and as grand as Sholay, and Ramesh Sippy was the first to recognize it and realize it, because after the mega success of Sholay, he realized that expectations from him were unreal. Everyone, the whole world, was watching and waiting for what his next film would be, and the comparisons with Sholay would be inevitable. It is something that Ramesh Sippy knew he couldn't escape. And hence, when he launched his next movie, he decided to make it diametrically opposite to Sholay. Sholay was a curry western with a rugged rural backdrop, and he decided to make his next film this urban, slick James Bond kind of a caper with gadgets and stylized visuals, and completely the opposite of Sholay. And the villain of Sholay, the high point of Sholay, one of the big high points of Sholay, the villain Gabbar Singh, and his crude and psychotic and violent ways, And the complete antithesis to that was the villain of Shan, who was sophisticated and suave, usually soft-spoken, and had a cold, kind of menacing, steely look. So Ramesh Sippy tried his best to stay away from Sholay. In fact, from Sholay onwards, the efforts made by Ramesh Sippy were always to move away from Sholay as much as he could in order to avoid comparisons. And the first step towards that was the making of Shan, which was the next release after Sholay. Shan was this lavishly mounted multi-starrer starring Sunil Dutt, Amitabh Bachchan, Shashi Kapoor, Shatrughan Sinha, Rakhi, Parveen Babi, Mazhar Khan, and Kulbhushan Kharbanda as the villain. And Shan was a slickly made entertainer, again scripted by Salim Javed. It had practically the same unit as Sholay, Salim Javed, Anand Bakshi, R.D. Burman, Dwarka Devecha. The team was the same. But the goal was to make something completely different from Sholay. And they succeeded with Shan. It was completely different from Sholay. It's an amazing thing that Shan is often spoken about as a flop. And, there are two reasons for it. A, the budget of Shan was huge. So to cover that budget and be called a hit would require an astronomical amount of business, which Shan didn't do. But to call it a flop was really unfair because it ran for over 50 weeks, which is 1 year. Shan did a golden jubilee, and very rarely in Hindi cinema do you get a golden jubilee which is termed a flop. So Shan is one of those rare films which, despite doing a golden jubilee, still gets branded as a flop. But the fact is, the comparison was inevitable with Sholay, and most people who saw Shan dismissingly said, "Oh, it's not Sholay. Sholay jaisa nahi hai." And of course, it wasn't meant to be Sholay. It was meant to be Shan. And if it's seen as an individual movie, as an independent movie, as a movie made by anyone else, it's a fantastic movie. It's just that Ramesh Sippy was carrying the burden of Sholay on his shoulders since the day the movie was a success. And all through his life, post-Sholay, no matter what he made, he would be compared, he would be pitted up against Sholay and found wanting. That was the case with Shan too. Unfortunately, but a much neglected and a much underrated crime caper, Shan. It's a superb movie. I mean, I love Shan. It's a huge favorite with me. Over the years, it has acquired the status of a cult movie. I know lots of people who love Shan, who enjoy it. It's really enjoyable. It has some fabulous moments, slickly made, brilliant music, some great shots, a lot of glitz and glamour, and it's a complete entertainer, made by Ramesh Sippy, Shan. To follow up Shan, Ramesh Sippy had this marvelous idea of bringing in two of India's finest actors and two of India's biggest stars at that time together. And he asked Salim Javed to work on an appropriate script. And an appropriate script was found. And Ramesh Sippy launched his next film, which was not under his father's banner, but for outside producers Mashir Riaz. And the film was the only film in Hindi film in the history of Hindi cinema to have the legendary Dilip Kumar and Amitabh Bachchan together. And it was aptly titled Shakthi. According to me, Shakthi is the finest film made by Ramesh Sippy. You have to forget Sholay, you have to keep Sholay out of the equation whenever we speak of Ramesh Sippy. But as a movie, Shakthi was simply superb. It stood on the foundations of a great script by Salim Javed, wonderful restraint and mature direction by Ramesh Sippy, and fabulous performances not just by Dilip Kumar and Amitabh Bachchan, but also by the supporting cast of Rakhi and Smita Patil. Shakti, according to me, is it's a once in a lifetime movie. I'm so glad that Dilip Saab and Mr. Bachchan didn't do another movie together. They were meant to do just one film together, and if it had to be one film, there couldn't have been a better movie than Shakti. It's the story of the confrontation, the tussle, the difference of ideology and opinion between a father and a son. An idealistic, duty-bound, morally upright father and his rebellious, at times wayward and angry son, and the pent-up anger that he holds, the disappointment, the brooding disappointment that he holds against his father. And it was brilliantly depicted by Ramesh Sippy. There are strong performances, the script is good, but Shakti eventually stands on Ramesh Sippy's direction. The way he was able to extract performances out of Dilip Saab and Mr. Bachchan, when both of them were superstars, and there was this constant apprehension of an ego tussle between two such huge stars. But the way Ramesh Sippy handled the movie was exemplary. He was brilliant in extracting the kind of performance he did from Dilip Saab and Mr. Bachchan. The very natural tendency when two such huge stars come together to work becomes the idea or the attempt to overshadow the other. It's a very natural instinct when two such mega stars work together. Both of them want to overshadow the other to show how superior each one is. But it's in the director's hand how he extracts performances out of them without it compromising on the end result, on the film. And that was Ramesh Sippy's brilliance about Shakti. Dilip Saab was superb, as was Mr. Bachchan. They both put in career best performances, according to me, in Shakti. And unfortunately, Shakti too didn't do very well at the box office, which is a huge surprise to me. I would have thought just the star cast itself would pull crowds into the theatre to watch the once-in-a-lifetime opportunity of seeing Dilip Kumar and Amitabh Bachchan together. But on retrospect, I feel perhaps Shakti as a movie was too heavy and a little low on lighter moments. I think Shakti, the one thing that was missing from Shakti was comedy, or at least a few light moments, because the movie was so intense and so emotionally charged and heavy that maybe it got a little too much for the audience to handle. And perhaps that is the reason why it didn't do as well as one expected it to do, or one thought it would do. But then it's the full credit of Salim Javed and Ramesh Sippy that they didn't compromise on the script. The script really had no scope for comedy or light moments. The script was such. It was about an emotional tussle between father and son, and the mother being unwittingly caught in between that tussle. So really, you couldn't expect too many light moments in a script like that. So kudos to the writers and the director for sticking their gun and making the film as per the script without catering to box office demands of comedy and unnecessary songs, etc. Shakti remains my personal favorite Ramesh Sippy movie, and for those very, very few rare people who haven't seen it, do watch it. to just establish a little more in your mind that Ramesh Sippy was much more than just Sholay. Shakthi is a fantastic movie. Ramesh Sippy returned to his own production with his father G.P. Sippy in 1982 after Shakthi was released. And this time he wanted to do something completely different. He wanted to do a love story. And he decided to have a casting coup of sorts when he announced his film starring Rishi Kapoor and the comeback girl Dimple Kapadia. Dimple Kapadia, who had become an overnight star with Bobby and never worked in films after that, was a much sought after actress all these 8 or 9 years that she hadn't worked. And it was Ramesh Sippy who managed to pull her out of her reclusion to make a comeback in his new film, Sagar. That was 1982, and Ramesh Sippy announced Sagar, starring Rishi Kapoor, Dimple Kapadia, the team of Bobby, and added in Kamal Hassan, who was fresh from his success of Ek Duje Ke Liye and Sanam Teri Kasam, and a hot star at the box office at that time. So Sagar looked like this mega dream project, written by Javed, who had just broken up from Salim, and he was writing scripts independently. It was written by Javed, with music by R.D. Burman, and starring Rishi Kapoor, Dimple Kapadia, and Kamal Hassan. Sagar looked like a dream project. Now, unfortunately, in India, or in the Hindi film industry, time is not kind to everyone. And it took 3 long years for Sagar to release. And it was primarily because of Ramesh Sippy's obsession for perfection. He wouldn't okay a shot unless he was 110% satisfied. And that kind of obsession led to Sagar being shot and reshot and reshot and rescripted, eventually till it was 1985 that it eventually saw release. Sagar is a lyrical, beautiful love story set in the backdrops of Goa. It's a love triangle and a beautiful movie with wonderful performances by all 3, Rishi Kapoor, Kamal Hassan and Dimple Kapadia, and some fabulous music by R.D. Burman. But by the time Sagar had released, the project had started looking jaded because of the time that had gone by. And the thrill and the excitement of Dimple Kapadia's comeback had just gone down, because she had already had 3 or 4 releases by the time Sagar, which was supposed to be her comeback film, by the time Sagar eventually released, she already had releases before that and they had flopped. And so Dimple's comeback was no longer the big news. Unfortunately for Ramesh Sippy, Sagar flopped, and that was a big blow, not only to him but to all the people who were associated with the movie, be it the 3 stars, Javed Akhtar, R.D. Burman. Everyone suffered from the flopping of Sagar. But that's how the industry is, and it's a harsh place and a cruel world, really, where the fickle-mindedness of the audience always has the last word. And despite being a beautifully made film, Sagar didn't do well at the box office, leaving Ramesh Sippy quite a disappointed man. Ramesh Sippy made quite a few movies after Sagar, but I won't be discussing them in this episode because according to me they're really not worth discussing. He made movies like Akela, Bhashtachar, Zamana Deewana, but none of them honestly can be called true Ramesh Sippy movies. I think after Sagar somewhat, his innings as a filmmaker had definitely come to an end. At least the important chapter had come to an end, and he was making movies which he shouldn't have been making. I mean, neither Akela nor Zamana Deewana or Bhashtachar are movies worth remembering. Ramesh Sippy found a huge amount of success in television after this phase when he made the mega serial Bunyad. And I will be talking about Bunyad and Ramesh Sippy's influence on TV, but that'll take another episode. This episode, as it is, has become very long, but it can't be helped, because when you have things to say about about a maker as great and talented as Ramesh Sippy, time really doesn't stand still. So I'll end my episode today about Ramesh Sippy on this note, that he is one of the finest filmmakers in Hindi cinema, to have given us a wide range of movies from Andaz and SitaGita to Shan and Shakthi and Sagar, and of course the crowning glory Sholay. Nothing more needs to be said about Ramesh Sippy other than the fact that he's a fabulous filmmaker. And one can only hope that at this fag end of his career, he does come out with one movie which is slightly different from all the movies he's made so far, just to show us that even now, even today, he is Ramesh Sippy. We'll hope for that, and we'll keep praying that that happens. That's it for this time. Until the next time, bye for now.